If an athlete ever wants to come out and tell us that we've got something wrong, that's fine. Because if they can give us enough information to show why we have the wrong answer, we've probably got enough to work out what the right answer is. Nothing that's said on YouTube or Instagram is necessarily new, it's just more public. For example, Andrew Hiller was not the first person to notice questionable reps when it comes to online video submissions or in-person CrossFit competitions. But that conversation was maybe reserved for your training buddies before or after a class, or during a class if you really wanted to wind up the coach. Likewise, changes to the CrossFit Games season structure or specific decisions made regarding an individual athlete would have still been questioned and discussed. The difference is when it's just you and 5 friends, nothing happens after that. But once it's made more public, whether that be a YouTube video or an Instagram post, and more voices start to get behind it, well then we see the needle move and action can take place. And while it's rare to see CrossFit themselves actually do anything, we are seeing athletes starting to respond. And in this video, I'd just like to highlight 2 examples that we can learn from, one being Annie Thorisdottir and the other is the recent example with Katrin Davidsdottir. Now obviously we could feel different ways about this, because is it fair that an athlete has to come out and address a situation when they haven't done anything wrong? Well no, that's not really fair, is it? But the problem is, if the people that are running the show behind the scenes, those that are making the rules, are not transparent, are not giving us the information we need, then we're going to have to make a few logical jumps in reasoning, and at times we're going to get things wrong. Now, if in getting something wrong it means somebody else has to come forward and set the matter straight, well, at least that way we're getting to the truth. And I'm sure the majority of us are then happy to hold our hands up, say, we got it wrong, and this is actually what's happening. And we know that nobody is infallible, we all make mistakes, especially when we don't have access to all the facts. And of course, at times CrossFit will address these different topics, they have their own media, they have their own podcasts, but if we're being honest, they're very often one-sided. Now, a lot of the reasonings behind this video is brought about because of a comment that was left on my last video talking about the worldwide ranking, the strength of field, and the region exemptions, and looking particularly at Katrin's case. So after that video was published, Katrin actually released more information about her specific situation. And somebody left a comment saying, I think this is why you should wait to hear from the sources before posting these types of video. Do we even know if Ellie tried and applied for an exemption? And you know what? To a degree, I actually agree with this comment. It is so much better if we can hear from the sources themselves. But now I have to let you in on a little secret. The majority of athletes do not know who I am, nor do they care, and they generally don't answer my questions. However, that being said, a number of times I have spoken about an athlete or a situation in a video, and then afterwards, as if by magic, suddenly they were available to talk, particularly if there was now a lot of discourse around something that happened, or if they wanted to set the matter straight. Now, unfortunately, I haven't spoken to Katrin herself, but she has put out some Instagram stories that addressed the situation, mostly in response to Brian Friend and Mike Halpin. Now, in the video, I covered the 4 different reasons that CrossFit has put in the rulebook for why someone may request an exemption. The last 3, we pretty much dismissed how could Katrin actually qualify for any of those, and so it was that first point that she has applied on. And this is what she said in her story. She's been living in the United States since 2015, she's got a green card, permanent residency, and actually is in the process of trying to get her citizenship. Now, of course, we only know this because Katrin has said it herself, and she's actually said that her status is a personal thing, one that she wouldn't want to talk about. So she's only spoken about it because Brian and Mike and people like that made enough noise within the community that she actually heard it. Now, whether or not we personally agree with the criteria that CrossFit is now using that allow an athlete to change region, especially when we know this will affect the strength of field calculation and game spots allocation, well, that is another matter. But at least now we have some more context to Katrin's situation, and we can contrast that with Ellie's situation and see that there are differences. Now, of course, it doesn't eliminate all the questions we may have, and maybe CrossFit will answer them in the future. For example, we know that Katrin spent time in Iceland last year. She says it was 6 months. So an obvious question for me would be, well, how long can an athlete then live outside of their new region and still claim to have consistently lived in that region? But that is a question for another day. But the point is, because people were speaking about the topic, the athlete finally defended themselves, and now we have more information. CrossFit didn't give us the answers, it was Katrin. But now let's shift to another area of CrossFit. We want to look at competition. We want to focus in on movement standards. We're going to look at Annie's example, particularly at Wodapalooza. Now, I don't want to pick apart every movement she did and whether or not she hit depth on a wall ball or if they hit the target at the same time. I just want to zoom in on one thing that was spoken about and one thing that was quite obvious when we looked up and down the field that it was different to everybody else, and that was, of course, her burpees over the dumbbell. Now, Andrew Hiller made a video about this, and even on the live stream you could hear Chase Ingram and Sean Woodland talking about it, and on the live stream you would have had people talking about it in the comments section as well. But just to give us all the context, let's take a quick look at some of Hiller's video.
So I'm going to double check what the pure standards are. It tends to...
Well, both her feet are off the ground at the same time if you watch, and if that's the standard, then she's riding the line.
She's riding the line. I suppose it's only fitting that I've made videos on Katrin, I've made videos on Mel O'Brien, and now I got to make a video on Annie Thorisdottir and how she is possibly using a little bit of the history that she's got with the sport to get away with something that clearly is not something that they have been briefed on. Look up and down the field. Look at her teammates even. And even remember Annie's first 2 burpees in this workout. Her feet are moving in unison. 2-foot takeoff, 2-foot landing over the dumbbell. This is something where it's very clear what the standard was on this, even on the broadcast, which is why I let that play. You hear, that isn't a jump. But wait, does it matter?
So that video has racked up more than 34,000 views. Let's add to that all the people talking about it that saw it on the live stream and were commenting there. So the question is, was Annie cheating? Are Wodapalooza just trying to protect CrossFit royalty? Well, once again, it was up to the athlete themselves to come forward and defend what they were doing. And Annie actually did this with an Instagram post. Now, in this post, she's quite lighthearted, poking a bit of fun at the situation, but she does admit to riding the line. But riding the line of the standard that she was given and briefed on, that both feet needed to be off the floor at the same time and not a 2-footed takeoff. And we heard Sean say a similar thing on the broadcast, not saying that was the standard, but just speculating if that was the standard, then yes, she was doing it, but definitely she was riding the line. But again, if we're not given that information, we don't have access to that briefing, we don't know exactly what she was told or briefed on the movements, all we can do is look up and down the field and see that everyone else is doing it a different way. Well, it's easy to see why logically we would come to the same conclusions that Hiller did. But that's not a bad thing, because even if Hiller hadn't made that video, as I said before, the conversation would still be taking place. It would just be happening in local boxes, and maybe she would never have addressed it. And of course, the same could be said for Katrin's example. We'd still be talking about it, we just might have never had the answer. So then what are our options at this point? If something happens within the CrossFit space, should we just not talk about it publicly until the person involved has come out and addressed the situation? Well, the discussions would still be taking place behind people's backs. We just might never get an answer because the athlete might never feel the need to come out and publicly address the situation. Or we just keep doing what we're doing now. We do as much research as we can. We try and gather information. We put out what we found, what we believe to be true. And then if someone has to come out and correct us and give us some additional information so that we now have the truth, well, at least we've gotten to the bottom of the situation. Of course, the dream scenario is that we can just ask these athletes the questions that we have, we'll get answers back, and then we can report the actual facts as they actually are. Now, I know for me that's probably a long way off. You can help by following me on Instagram at JasonCFmedia or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Now, again, I'll say, is it fair that athletes have to come out and talk about situations when they've done nothing wrong? They've just followed the rules, and we're just not clear on what the rules are? Well, no, it's not fair. So maybe athletes should also be involved in trying to advocate for CrossFit and competitions to be more transparent, to give us more information so we understand that they haven't done anything wrong. But until that happens, I guess this is the system we have.